successful in our hearts and lives today. Be honored in us, we pray, in Jesus' name. Amen. All right.
Amen. Have fun with it. Famous last words to any teen, right? Let's put this in a few situations, right? Cleaning your room, have fun with it. Cooking dinner, have fun with it. Tastes great. Driving home, have fun with it. Okay, maybe not, but the point of this is we young people often lack better judgment, and telling us to have fun with it or entrusting responsibilities to us doesn't always work out the best because we don't always see the possible consequences of our actions. And this would be a problem if we didn't have voices of guidance and authority in our lives to help us stay in check. And oddly enough, these words, have fun with it, are the exact words of advice given by Brad Anderson regarding today. Bold move, Brad. Okay, I do know what he meant, not to be overly rigid, to keep this a bit natural because I'm new. And I want you to know that I do take this seriously. But it's words like these that young people trust in to take direction. Voices like Brad's, who's been a leader and teacher here at Lakeland. And none of us are meant to go at life alone. And that's what we're talking about today, is listening to the voices of one another. Because the connection between us, young people, and you maybe not quite young, I don't know what to call you, it matters. So when preparing for today, I really struggled with the feeling that I had nothing to offer you guys. And although public speaking can be terrifying, this wasn't a matter of self-confidence. I mean, on paper, what on earth might some not even 20-year-old high school grad have to say to people 2 to 3 times his age that actually bears any sense of meaningful insight or applicability? I was at a loss. And that's when it kind of hit me, that the best thing I have to offer the church is myself, even in all my naivete. There's no need to present a veneer. So although my perspectives are certainly young and inexperienced, they still offer considerable value. Why is that? Because my perspective as a young person is reflective of 2 distinct things. First, my experience highlights some of the struggles that young people face, which are rarely talked about, at least from the perspective of a young person. And secondly, is more relevant to today's topic, is the fact that I am a product of you. Like Dan said, I've been going to this church my whole life. I've been through the youth ministry. And that being said, my values and outlook should somewhat be reflective of how, or more accurately, by whom I was taught. Just to make it clear, that is you. So as a church congregation, if you take care in investing in future generations, today can serve as an example of how you're doing. So if I'm not doing the best, now let me make a statement both to the young and old people. Investing in young people particularly matters because they are the means by which God continues the church. I inherit what all of you began, and you want to leave your things with someone you entrust, right? Now, there are a number of things to unpack here, but to me, the mere concept of bearing the responsibility to properly deliver the past into the future is a terrifying endeavor. I mean, I already struggle this when trying to keep track of my past expenses for tax season. But why is this terrifying in relation to the church? I'm not exactly sure. One thing I can put my finger on, however, is that although I'm quite familiar with what we often do around here, I'm not often knowledgeable as to why we do it. In other words, there are many things of the Christian faith that I practice, but yet to truly value in my heart. And that's something we all struggle with to some extent, because church can become quite ritualistic. You know, go home, come on Sundays, and it repeats. But our obedience to God is, and to an extent, proven by the fact that what we're actually doing is genuine. So I'm worried that over time, if these things continue to lack value, one, they might fall away. Something of worth may no longer be continued to value and be understood. And secondly, the practice can become ritualistic and tradition if it lacks all sense of personal meaning, leading it to typically falling away. And I understand this journey of working out our faith is something we all take part in, but how much of a help would it be to hear the guiding words from those directly ahead of me on the same path to help make sense of things? Just to be clear, that voice directly ahead of me should be you. Now notice, I use the word should, because whether or not you choose to partake, some voice will fill that void of guidance, possibly bringing satisfaction to itching ears. And again, young people of itching ears, don't always trust us. You should probably learn from experience. But There's many, and although there might be many of great thing that you can recommend young people towards, like YouTube pastors, self-help books, I believe you are the means by which God is choosing to impart biblical wisdom into the life of a young and hurting person. And why is this? Because what better person is there to take advice from other than those who know you, who love you, and who see exactly what you're going through because they're right beside you? Your job as a believer is not to defer the responsibility of consoling the lost and those who have yet to been found, but to take up this opportunity to meet people where they're at. And we should apply this same attitude to teaching those younger than us. You're not qualified to do this because you have it all figured out, not because you're perfect. I know you're not. But because maybe you've gone through something similar and you know a guy who helped get you to the other side. Your faith and obedience is what allows you to be a voice of wisdom to the inexperienced. And the relationship between the young and old is formed when the other trusts in their words. Again, not because of some qualification, because the fruit of your faith is radiant compared to what the world has to offer. And that's quite beautiful. So my perspective on kind of this whole matter is, it's cool, it's all right, but let's take a minute to evaluate something a bit more authoritative. Deuteronomy 4 is where we're going to be focusing on this theme of inheritance. But let's step away from the main theme for a second to establish some technical aspects. I understand studying the Old Testament can be confusing, so I'm going to preface our text with an important viewpoint. Most notably, I want to diffuse a common misconception, which even I carried until recently, and that's this idea of some great divide, a Grand Canyon appearing between the Old and New Testaments, where God transitioned from acting according to the law to acting now according to grace. And to use one of Brad's illustrations, when Jesus died, there wasn't some binary switch in heaven that God had one of the angels flip from law to grace. And if you died while it was being flipped, who knows? And this is because God has always operated according to grace. So there's continuity between the Old and New Testaments. But before Jesus died as the perfect sacrifice once and for all, grace had to be continually renewed through ritualized and perfect practices. The Old Testament merely points to what was to be made perfect or fulfilled in the New Testament by Christ. That being said, although the Old Testament is filled with laws like don't wear mixed fabrics, don't plant mixed seeds, don't trim your beard, don't boil a young goat in its mother's milk. I know it's Family Sunday, but don't stone your rebellious children, or don't. But albeit not obvious, the purpose behind these laws is what mattered. In order for God to dwell with his people, it was necessary that they remained obedient and pure, which they achieved by obeying these laws. Just like we achieve communion with God through faith and obedience to Christ. Both of these can come to be through the means of grace. So I ask that you apply this attitude to Deuteronomy 4, internalizing today and obeying the spirit of the law since it still carries authoritative weight. And this viewpoint is only emphasized when we also take note that the story of Israel is symbolic in how it represents the human condition in our relationship with God. And this relationship is often defined by a continuing cycle of rebellion, restoration, and covenant relationship that lasts. And when I last checked, the human condition really hasn't changed over the past 6,000 years, so we do still have a lot to learn from their struggles because ours are quite similar. Point being, of all this, the Old Testament is still applicable to a New Testament church, so though we're in Deuteronomy, this still matters. And now that we've established some of the nature of the Old Testament, let's actually look at how Deuteronomy is built structurally in a kind of a technical context. Deuteronomy is the final of the 5 law books, and the word Deuteronomium, that took a while to say, has been commonly translated as second law, but more aptly means copy of this law. Moses wasn't creating a new law in this exhortation to the Israelites, but he was merely expanding upon what they already know, and also emphasizing it in the light of their recurring and past failures. And Moses was the perfect candidate for this since he had been with Israel since the beginning, and he knew their issues and their weaknesses by heart, the same weaknesses that would plague them in the future. So what makes Deuteronomy unique in its structure is its treaty covenant-like nature, technically saying, as the nature of an ancient Near Eastern suzerain vassal treaty, as many scholars have found. So these types of treaties were formed when a powerful king would make agreements with the less powerful kings in the region and those less powerful kings' people. And the treaties would outline specific ways in which the conquered kingdom was to operate now that it was under the new king's control. When referring to Israel, this is what happened when God delivered his people from Egypt to be in relationship with him. He conquered and claimed them as his. That being said, these type of agreements were commonplace and carried with them a sense of immense weight. Everyone knew what they meant. They were law. So let's take a moment to look over the different parts of these treaties. First, you have the preamble, and also please take note on the right side, you will see a breakdown of the chapters where these pieces are outlined. So the preamble kind of identifies who's involved. Who does this treaty, this law apply to? In Deuteronomy, you get titles of authority, genealogies, but it's between Moses, the Israelites, and God. Now, the second part of these treaties was a historical prologue, and this is where chapter 4 lies. And this is a declaration of the events leading to the formation of the treaty, often like military victories. If one conquered another, why this treaty is being formed. Then you actually get to kind of the law portion of this, of how this relationship is to look like in general and also specific stipulations. And then also found in Deuteronomy is there's these statements, or the Deuteronomic principles of do this and you will be blessed, or don't do this because you will be cursed. They're warnings to obedience. And then lastly, something that I think is pretty cool is you have this section about witnesses. And at least in Deuteronomy, Moses, he calls to angels, nature, and creation as witnesses to the treaty that is being formed on that day. Because he knew eventually he and the people who are witnessing the signing of this treaty would pass away. And if they pass away, how is this treaty still binding? It's binding because they're not the only witnesses, therefore making this treaty eternal. And why am I telling you all this? Because our text in chapter 4, right at the end of the historical prologue, is the hinge that connects their past relationship to how they shall now obey. The nature of this chapter is really to be a very general overview of the law that follows, being so general, in fact, that it sets up a presentation of the Ten Commandments, which we consider a general summary of the law. So this is like an introduction to a summary. It's very general, and that's why I think it's so powerful in actually getting at the spirit of what we should be believing in. So what is it that we are to obey? Let me outline it for you. Starting Deuteronomy 4, verse 1, we see a series of 3 unconditional commands issued by Moses in the second person, meaning directly to the reader. And these commands are to be the basis of Israel's relationship with God and were to be regularly renewed, or in our case, remembered. But I also ask you that as we enter into this new year, you renew these 3 commands with God. So we're going to be calling them New Year's resolutions for today. And starting in verse 1, page 85 in the Bibles under your chair. And now, O Israel, listen to the statutes and rules that I am teaching you, and do them, that you may live, and go in and take possession of the land the Lord, the God of your fathers, is giving you. In verse 1, we have found our first resolution, to listen and obey. I think obedience is pretty implicit in the command to obey, but it's important that what we hold allegiance to is actually true. That's what we do here during sermons and small groups, is we listen to the word so that we can correctly discern what we should be doing. And then we do it, and we hold each other accountable to do it. For Israel, this was particularly important because they could only enter and remain in the promised land if they were obedient. Now, moving to our second resolution, verse 2, you shall not add to the word that I command you, nor take from it, that you may keep the commandments of the Lord your God that I command you. Your eyes have seen what the Lord did at Baal Peor, for the Lord your God destroyed from among you all the men who followed the Baal of Peor. But you who held fast to the Lord your God are all alive today. See, I have taught you statutes and rules, as the Lord my God commanded me, that you should do them in the land you are entering to take possession of. Just like any treaty or binding agreement, it cannot be subject to change, or else the nature of it isn't truly binding. So, the second command is best understood as preserve the word. And although the command is given here is in reference to the law and the 10 Commandments, because that's all they had at this point in time, we should consider this as binding to the principles introduced in the later books of the Bible. And this law is issued for a couple of reasons. Firstly, even thousands of years later, the Bible's present applicability is reflective of divine authorship and complete sufficiency. We don't need anything more than what the Bible has to offer. Yes, it does have to be interpreted, but leading into our second thing about this is that we don't need any more, because if we desire more, we're going to try to justify our sin. We're going to add things that we don't need. And for the Israelites, Their justification of sin meant countless occurrences of idolatry through ritual worship of gods like the golden calf or Baal. So when Israel intermixed with these other cultures and adopted their gods, in essence, they were appending corrupt practices to the scriptures. But in an atheistic society such as ours, this looks a bit different. An obvious example amongst the modern church is man becoming his own God, deciding who and what he is, with some even rooting their identity in things like sexuality and human freedoms, instead of the responsibilities commanded by God outlined in the Bible. So it's certainly possible for man to distort the Bible without making additions or subtractions, because many of these people, they acknowledge the Bible and they say they believe it, but they filter the truth through their own carnal desires. And that's a danger for us as well. So please watch out. Moving on to the third resolution. Verse 6, keep them and do them, for that will be your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the peoples, who, when they hear all these statutes, will say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. For what great nation is there that has a God so near to it as the Lord our God is to us whenever we call upon him? And what great nation is there that has statutes and rules so righteous as all this law that I set before you today? Here we are given the command to be a light, or also understood evangelism. God's goal in using us isn't just to bring him glory, but for all people from all nations to become disciples and commune with him again. Our obedience is not the only way by which we are righteous, but it's also how we evangelize. By obeying to do things the world would consider unexpected. And the world takes notice not only because the things we do are to be different, but because the fruit of our actions and lifestyle point to the fact that what we have is true. Our God actually exists and is with us. For Israel, this was demonstrated countless times, and no other nation had a God so present. When he sent the plagues on Egypt, he parted the seas, he's led them in the wilderness, all in the effort to make a way so that he could be with them again. And we're part of this same plan, don't you see? Now, that's the three resolutions of how we live in obedience despite any of the circumstances we face. Listen to the word and do it. Don't change the word or allow something else to become your God. Show others the way onto the same path. And this is God's mission in a nutshell, right? For us to be his until we can be fully with him forever. But how does this relate to continuing the church? Although the past few minutes may have seemed like a wild tangent in Deuteronomy, the passage points to the fact that our relationship with Christ is the foundation that all of us have in relating to one another. It's because of this that parents and leaders have something to offer their child. It is by our faith and obedience that you can give them something real. And to remind you the resounding answer is that our personal faith and willingness to obey the previous three resolutions is where this all starts. Because in order to be an authority worth listening to, you must have the dynamic between yourself and God figured out first. Just to be clear, I don't find young or old to necessarily be specific age groups, because all of us, to some extent, have someone younger than us that needs to be led in a thing or two, and also someone older than us that we can learn from in a thing or two. So all of us have to practice some extent of both leadership and obedience in our lives. And I understand this dynamic changes as you grow up, and especially as you approach the end of your teens and you begin to discover that you are now your own person and your faith is your own. That's kind of what I've been going through. But no matter where you are in life, there will always be people above and below you. So listen closely to the next portion of chapter 4, because it shows us how we can keep our faith and also give it purpose beyond ourselves to those other people. Verse 9, only take care and keep your soul diligently, lest you forget the things that your eyes have seen, and lest they depart from your heart all the days of your life. It's important to note that this command is separate from the previous three resolutions, because it's not a command outlining our general acts of obedience. Rather, these commands set for us the means by which we can remain in a state of obedience, even when difficulty arises. So namely, this verse implies that remaining in obedience is best accomplished by remembering the past acts of God, something Israel was absolutely terrible at. And the Lord certainly knows everything you are to endure, but we forget this at times. And we forget to remember the areas in our lives where he has worked in previously. So when our hearts become cold and we begin to blame God or wonder, why is this happening to me? You're forgetting his power and what he's done, and you are the one responsible for your coldness of heart and your lack of love. Because he has given evidence in your life of why you should trust him now, both today and tomorrow. And if you correctly look through the lens of the Bible, the objective evidence is that God has only done good in the lives of everyone. So when you blame God for the existence of evil, it is an act of willful ignorance and ungratefulness. And we're called to remember these things not only because it sustains our own faith, but we're able to use it as testimony to share with others. Even if someone hasn't made the same mistakes as you, when you share with others how God redeemed that broken part of your life, God is giving that person additional evidence through you as to why they should take faith. And so that person may be greatly encouraged, and they may choose to take faith, or alternatively, they may remain in their pride and deny something that they are now culpable for. Testimony has to its, in nature, it is legal. And moving on to the last portion of verse 9, we get the final commands. And what today is really about. Make them known to your children and your children's children, how on the day that you stood before the Lord your God at Horeb, the Lord said to me, gather the people to me that I may let them hear my words, so that they may learn to fear me all the days that they live on the earth, and that they may teach their children to do so. We finally have the command, instruct your children. And we're actually given its explicit purpose, which is pretty cool. We instruct our children so that they may learn to fear me all the days they live on the earth, and that they may teach their children to do so. This is why teaching the younger generation is so important, because if this command is properly adhered to, by design, it is a means by which all people can come to obey and continue the kingdom from generation to generation, which is God's goal. Additionally, however, this command offers a number of enhancements to the 3 resolutions of obedience. So by obeying and also instructing, a system is built that is refining itself and is beneficial in different ways. So when teaching anything in life, it requires a fairly deep, concrete understanding of what's actually true. So when you go to instruct someone, you have to understand it yourself and also defend why it's not a different way, why your viewpoint and understanding, for the most part, is correct. So you have to not only make sense of the faith, but also explore the past experiences in your life where God was at work so that you remember it and have something to share. And this carries over to the second resolution as well, to preserve the word. And you very much so preserve the word by imparting it to those around you. And those below you by relationship, when they witness your faith and see how it makes you distinct amongst those you interact with, also adds on to the third point of making your wisdom and understanding known simply by your actions. And this is how your children are to recognize you, by your relationship with Christ, which makes you noticeably different to what's found in the world. Implicitly from this command, in summary, we learn that obedience to God is enhanced when we instruct others. And intuitively, from this command, we learn that sharing with those younger has the explicit goal of equipping them to be obedient. And by being obedient in your own life and teaching your children what obedience is, you equip them with both reason and means by which they can choose to take faith. Then, once they're in that relationship, defined by worship, they can be entrusted to carry out his will, continuing it beyond your lifetime and also their lifetime as well. And this is the nature of the covenant relationship of which we have been in since the time of Abraham. And yes, it has changed hands in the Old Testament, from Abraham to the patriarchs to Israel until it was eventually extended to us. But its nature hasn't changed. And this is the same plan that we're a part of today. So you, albeit maybe a small part in continuing what God has already begun, you are a major part in the young lives of those closest to you, because God has designed you to be the key by which they can come to understand him. No, I'm no parent, but I hope I would be correct in saying that having a child of your own unlocks another dimension of understanding as to what the relationship with God is like, especially the part about patience and discipline and being nice to someone who's really not being nice to you, I suppose. Many things to look forward to. But although I can't look from the top down in this situation as a parent, I can look from the bottom up as a child. And I hope to remind you of who you are as a parent, kind of some of your responsibilities. So here's my first and last poem as a professional poet. You love me not by what I do, but because I'm yours. Although I did nothing to earn it, you give me the world, and now you wait to see what I shall do with it. From you I have come to accept discipline. for you wish to protect me from things I yet to know. Even when I do stray for a time, you are always hopeful for my return. Even though I sometimes hurt you, forgiveness flows from your wounds, and you are always there because it's in our relationship you find your delight. And I hope these words resonate with you both as a child of a parent, but also a child of God, because that relationship is supposed to be reflective. And the point being of this is that your children look to you for everything, and you are in their greatest enjoyment in life. And typically, parents, they're your greatest enjoyment as well. Therefore, God has chosen you to be for a time the source by which your child comes to know the world. There's no one better to teach them than you, because you are in the literal sense part of them. They came from you. I understand there's exceptions to this, but nonetheless, you have the opportunity as a parent and elder to equip young people with your own curated medley of life experience and scriptural applications to help them get through life's challenges and temptations. I'm sure throwing a Bible at them may be a technically correct response, but God actually wants you to be involved. And the young people nowadays, and for all time, always need experienced doctors to make sense of what's wrong and how to fix it before they can actually fix it and also show others how to fix it. And from a young person to all of you, when you share yourself with us, your experiences, your wisdom, what you've gathered over the years between you and God that truly is to always be remembered, it matters, and the word becomes alive through you. And no, you won't be perfect as this and this relationship, this action of sharing, because you can't be, and surprise, your child won't be perfect either. That kind of moves on to the last portion of this verse, where we are called to establish communities. Although your parents, for children, always remain the most important in their life, children typically go through periods where their parents are not the most immediately influencing. There will be moments when a child looks to people other than their parents for guidance. And it's pretty common in the teen years when you start getting the eye rolls, the fine, Mom, and they slam the door. Or to some extent of that, some that we all did. It's important that there's other people present in their life that they can turn to. Because inevitably, whether in a good or bad circumstance, kids look for external voices of wisdom at times. So who does this verse highlight as having this role? Grandparents. Because your kids are also an extension of your parents as well. This is what is built into creation. And I also understand that not everyone has grandparents. I don't. But the general idea is to have someone else in their life that they can look up to. And it's better you know who these people are, you make an effort to establish those relationships with people you trust, than alternatively allow your child to go searching on their own. And parents, take heed, because your child is being raised in a world with many voices, and today it's commonplace that they spend more time with these voices than you. That's really everything I can say authoritatively regarding obedience and the mindset you should have when coming to instructing your children as either a parent, an elder, a leader. But now let's take a moment to turn and actually kind of have the rubber meet the road on this. And for this next portion, I don't stand with a sense of authority, but just as a young Lakeland attendee who lives in the 21st century. What's got me most fearful nowadays is that the church that I've come to know and believe may not be the same 20 years from now, that the great divide forming between the young and old will only grow wider as technology increases and we continue to isolate ourselves. And it feels that my generation is quite separate from those preceding me, primarily in culture, but to some extent it feels that we're living in totally different realities. And this scares me because your voice is becoming but a whisper amongst the sea of voices we hear every day. Whether it be the classroom, social media, entertainment, or the news, my generation is growing up in a time where almost everyone and everything has an agenda. And I don't want to name anything specific, but I bet there's many things that you can bring to mind of what the world is doing nowadays that it doesn't make sense. And I feel like I'm in a position where I have to make sense of these things. So it's sort of like, I don't know what to make sense of this, so I am turning to you because you've been through this before, and history repeats itself. So I believe you have the experience and the knowledge necessary to make sense of the chaos that we're in. And no, I'm not looking for solutions, just answers, because the answer that you can always give us is to point us towards Christ in the context of our problems. So, by being passive and failing to instruct your children in the ways of the Lord, you may even lose your child while they sit right next to you. And to be clear, technology is not necessarily the issue. It's merely a tool. So don't go burning down Google or anything, but also don't join TikTok. We don't need more grandmas on TikTok. But on a serious note, if I could ask one thing of the older generation, care to make clear the problems and lies we young people face. Give us a reason to trust you by being present, active, and a voice of definitive wisdom. I'm not asking for solutions, again, just answers. And that's what you have to point towards. Be a loud and present voice in the lives of young people. And notice, again, I'm not giving any direct advice or applications because I don't know exactly what I'm missing. I don't think I've been around the block enough times to have a correct grasp of these situations. So something that you have which is real to offer your children is yourself and your love and your wisdom and understanding from your past experience and from your relationship with Christ, as guided by obedience to the Word. Now, I didn't know exactly where to put this next part, but it was kind of one of the more motivating parts of this sermon, and that's your children aren't born Christians. They're not born saved. I was having a meal a couple of months ago with John Warehouser, Dan's eldest, and before leaving the restaurant, we were going around asking for prayer requests, and his was that his daughter would choose to accept Christ. And parents, I think you would agree that one of your greatest fears in life is to lose your child. And when this is true regarding the physical, how much more is it true regarding the spiritual and the eternal? Being saved doesn't just mean you're born into a Christian family and grow up in the church. It's a choice made of your own free will. But thankfully, the Bible describes here that you can help others make that choice. So take care with how you live, because you may be the only Bible your children ever read. Wrapping up, let's review what we've gone over today. First, adhere to the 3 resolutions of obedience. Listen and obey to God's word. Preserve it. And also, don't hide how it changes you. Let others observe that, because through you, they will come to know the same God you believe in. But also, instruct those younger than you. And do this passively by being obedient. But also do it actively. Give them explicit explanation and instruction as to what's going on, because, as I mentioned earlier, you can practice something without valuing it. You can go to church every Sunday without being saved. You can even be a preacher and have gone to seminary and not be saved, because there are stories of this. But it is by you and your explanation and your lifestyle that your children can actually come to not just know, but believe and take heart in what we do here. And also, just as a note, discern the other authorities present in their lives. Choose good schools and churches, because you're not the only voice in their life. And to tag back to that last command, also directly instruct your grandchildren, those other kids around you who maybe you're not even related to, but you have something to give them. And if you don't have grandchildren, maybe you're not at that stage in life where God hasn't blessed you with that gift. There's plenty of young people, such as myself, who can use your wisdom. And also, I haven't really mentioned this yet, but remember, you also have things to learn from those older than you. So that command in the 10 Commandments to honor your parents and authorities above you, it lasts arguably your entire life. So listen and obey these authorities. Remember what they say, and obey them when they're not around. Because as a parent, you are to be a law to those who can't understand. You have to make sense of the Bible to your children. And also, if you're in this place of, I don't have a ton of authority over my own life, just remember, you will have plenty of time to be in charge. So there's no need to rush it, and just take faith and be obedient in the process. So that's what I have for you today. If you just take a moment to bow your heads and pray with me over this. Lord, I thank you for allowing us another day to be here at Lakeland as a family, Lord. And I just thank you for the ways the older generation has blessed me today, whether it be sending an encouraging text or praying over me, Lord. It's certain that you are active in their hearts and they are active in many of our lives, but because of our imperfect nature, there's always more to be had, Lord, and I just pray that you be on the hearts of those who maybe aren't active in their lives, of the children and the communities, to find that part of their life to work out with you so they can share it with them. Lord, just renew us in our obedience again. And also be in the hearts of those younger. May you help them put down whatever's distracting them, Lord, to come out of that place of isolation, to actually see the older people, recognize their wisdom, recognize that what they have is loving and real. And may they be receptive towards that wisdom so that they can practice it as well and also bring you glory, Lord. I ask these things in your Son's name because Christ is the only means by which this can happen, Lord. And I thank you for the acts of obedience we're about to now witness as we enter into